All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to tackle something that I think a lot of people have strong feelings about: HOAs, homeowners associations, here in Georgia.
Yeah, they can definitely be a hot topic.
For sure. For sure. So whether you're already in an HOA, thinking about buying a place in one, or just, kind of curious about how they work, we're going to go beyond the basic no parking on the grass stuff. We're going to really get into the nuts and bolts and maybe even bust some myths along the way.
Absolutely. I think people will be surprised by how much HOAs really impact, not just how a neighborhood looks, but property values and even safety, believe it or not.
Okay, so before we get too deep into it, let's back up for a sec. Just for anyone who's totally new to this whole HOA thing, what is an HOA? What makes it more than just a set of rules,
So think of an HOA as like a mini government for your neighborhood. They handle a lot of the stuff that you might not even think about: taking care of shared spaces, managing the community's money, and enforcing those rules. All of that is to make sure things run smoothly and property values stay strong.
Right.
Makes sense.
But here's the thing. A lot of people focus on the restrictions, but studies have actually shown that HOAs, especially active ones, can actually help lower crime rates.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I never thought about that.
It kind of makes sense when you think about it, though, right? A well-maintained community where people are invested, it kind of sends a message like, hey, we're watching out for each other here.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like that whole broken windows theory, right?
Exactly.
If a place looks neglected, people are more likely to, cause trouble.
Exactly.
So it's not just about keeping things pretty. It's about creating a safer environment overall.
Absolutely. And that's where, resident involvement becomes super important. If homeowners aren't engaged, it makes it really hard for the HOA to do its job effectively.
Right. You can't just be the board doing all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
So speaking of heavy lifting, let's talk about what HOAs are actually responsible for. I got to admit, when I was prepping for this, I was kind of surprised by the sheer scope of services they provide.
It really is a lot more than meets the eye.
Yeah.
They handle everything from budgeting and managing the money, which, keeps the lights on and the pool clean, to maintaining those common areas like parks and playgrounds.
Right.
They also play a big role in communication, keeping everyone informed about what's going on in the community.
It sounds like running a small business almost.
It kind of is.
Especially when you think about the financial side of things, managing assessments, paying vendors. There's a lot to juggle.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where those reserve funds come into play. They're like a savings account for the community, for those big unexpected repairs, or, when something breaks down.
Yeah.
Let's say the playground needs to be replaced, right? That can be a huge expense. If the HOA doesn't have enough in reserve, it could mean a big jump in everyone's assessments.
That makes sense. It's like having that financial cushion to fall back on.
Right.
Now, our research mentioned a situation where an HOA ran into a funding shortfall for a playground replacement. What's the best way to handle something like that?
Well, the HOA definitely shouldn't just raise assessments without talking to the homeowners first.
Right.
And while dipping into those reserves might seem like a quick fix, it's important to remember that those funds are there for a reason,
Yeah.
Using them all up could leave the community in a tough spot down the road.
Yeah.
The ideal approach is transparency and communication. The HOA should have a meeting, explain the situation clearly, and really involve the homeowners in the decision-making process.
So it's about having those open conversations, working together to find solutions, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And that's where, that whole concept of transparency comes into play. It's super important for building trust, especially in a community that's, governed by an HOA.
Think about your own HOA, right? How would you rate their transparency on a scale of 1 to 5? 5 being totally open, 1 being, well, let's just say needs improvement.
Yeah. Where do you think they excel, and where do you think they could do better?
Oh, that's a good question. I have to think about that. Our research actually highlighted 2 different HOAs. One that was incredibly transparent and one that, wasn't. And the difference in how satisfied the homeowners were, the overall vibe of the community, it was pretty striking.
It really highlights how those seemingly small things, like holding open meetings, making financial documents easy to find, just being responsive to people's concerns, it can really make a huge difference.
It's about showing that the HOA is there to serve the homeowners, not the other way around. Right.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that I know a lot of homeowners find kind of daunting, which is the whole financial side of things. It's your money that they're managing, so understanding how it all works is super important.
For sure.
I'll admit, those financial statements can look kind of intimidating at first glance. Income statements, balance sheets, reserve funds. It's like a whole different language. But like they say, knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
So let's try to break it down, make it a little less scary. First up, the income statement. If I'm remembering this right, it basically shows where the money comes from and where it goes.
You got it. Think of it like a household budget for the whole community.
Okay.
On one side, you've got the revenue, mostly from those assessments that homeowners pay, but also things like interest from investments or late fees, stuff like that. And then on the flip side, you've got the expenses, landscaping, pool maintenance, all the stuff that keeps the community running.
So it's like tracking the money flowing in and out over a certain period of time.
Right, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the balance sheet? How does that sit in?
So the balance sheet is kind of like a snapshot in time, showing the HOA's financial health at a specific moment.
Okay.
It shows what the HOA owns, which are called assets, and what they owe, which are called liabilities.
So assets would be things like the clubhouse, any equipment they own, and of course those reserve funds we talked about.
Exactly. And liabilities, those are things like loans they might have taken out for a project or money they owe to vendors, things like that.
So basically, by looking at the balance sheet, you can get a sense of, are they in the black or in the red?
Right. Are their assets greater than their liabilities? Are they carrying a lot of debt? It's all important information.
Definitely. And this is where, understanding these documents can really give homeowners some power, right?
Absolutely.
You can see if the HOA is managing things responsibly, making smart financial decisions, making sure your money is being used wisely. Now, we keep mentioning this term fiduciary duty. Can you explain what that means, specifically for HOAs?
Yeah, so basically, the board members have a legal obligation to act in the best interest of the homeowners.
Okay.
It's like a higher level of responsibility. It goes beyond just doing a good job.
So they can't just throw money around just because it's community money.
Right. They need to be just as careful with it as they would be with their own money.
Gotcha. So our research gave this example where a vendor submitted a bid for a project that was way higher than what the HOA had budgeted.
Yeah.
What should the board do in a situation like that?
Well, they definitely shouldn't just approve it without really thinking it through.
Right.
They need to do their due diligence, try to negotiate with the vendor, maybe get bids from other companies, or even explore different options that might be more cost effective.
So it's about being responsible and making sure they're getting the best value for the community.
Exactly.
It all comes back to that fiduciary duty. Now, we've been talking a lot about the traditional HOA model, where the board usually hires a management company to handle a lot of the day-to-day stuff. But our research mentioned this other approach, the hybrid HOA model, which I thought was really interesting. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the hybrid model is becoming more popular as HOAs are looking for ways to save money and have more control over how things are run. It's all about finding that balance between professional management and homeowner involvement.
So instead of outsourcing everything to a management company, the HOA might choose to manage certain tasks themselves. It's kind of like if you were renovating your house, you might decide to be your own general contractor, right?
Exactly. Some HOAs might handle things like vendor relationships or communicating with homeowners directly, but still use a management company for specialized stuff like accounting or legal things.
So it's about picking and customizing the management approach based on what the community needs.
And potentially saving some money in the process.
That's always a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm definitely curious to hear more about how this hybrid model works in practice, what some of the pros and cons are. But I think we need to take a quick break first. When we come back, we'll dive deeper into the world of hybrid HOAs and see if this alternative approach might be right for your community. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before the break, we were starting to get into this whole idea of hybrid HOAs, which I got to say, I find pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely a different way of thinking about how HOAs can be managed.
So can we break down how it actually works? What makes it hybrid?
Sure. So instead of having a management company handle pretty much everything, a hybrid HOA takes a more, you could say, DIY approach to certain things.
Right.
Like they might decide to manage some of the vendors themselves, things like landscaping, pool maintenance, those kind of routine services. And by cutting out the middleman, so to speak, they can tap into the expertise of the other homeowners, right?
Okay.
Lots of communities have residents with professional backgrounds in different areas who might be willing to, lend a hand or offer some advice.
So it's like using the resources that are already within the community.
Exactly. And that can actually be a really good thing. It helps build that sense of community, gets people more involved.
Definitely. So even in a hybrid model, they're not totally on their own.
Right. They might still use a management company for certain things, like the financial stuff or maybe legal issues, things that require more specialized knowledge.
Okay. So it's about finding the right balance.
Exactly.
Now, this all sounds pretty good so far, but I'm sure there are some downsides too, right? What are some things HOA should think about before they decide to go hybrid?
Well, one of the biggest things is, do they have enough people who are willing to actually do the work? Managing vendors, taking care of all those day-to-day tasks, it takes time and effort.
Yeah, for sure. It's like any volunteer organization. You need people who are dedicated and passionate about making it work.
Exactly. And another thing to consider is the potential for liability. If the HOA is managing vendors directly, they need to make sure they have the right insurance and that they're doing things by the book, to protect themselves.
That's a good point. You don't want to end up in some legal mess
Right.
just because you're trying to save a few bucks.
Right. So it's important to weigh the risks and benefits carefully. But, beyond all the operational stuff, it's also important to remember that HOAs are ultimately about creating communities. Right. It's not just about rules and regulations. It's about people living together, sharing a space.
Yeah, and that's where that whole transparency and communication thing comes back into play.
Absolutely.
If people feel like they're being kept in the dark or that their opinions don't matter, it can create a lot of tension and distrust.
Oh, for sure. Speaking of which, remember those two HOAs we talked about earlier, the transparent one and the not so transparent one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What were some of the big differences between how they operated?
Well, the transparent HOA, they really made an effort to keep everyone informed about what was going on. They published detailed financial reports, had open meetings where people could ask questions. They even had an online forum where residents could connect and share information.
So they were really proactive about communicating, making sure everyone felt included.
Exactly. Whereas the other HOA, they were much more, closed off. It was hard to get information. The meetings were often held in secret. People didn't really know what was going on, and that created a lot of suspicion and mistrust.
It almost sounds like they were trying to hide something.
Yeah, and that's the problem with the lack of transparency, right? It creates all this speculation and rumors, which just makes things worse.
It's like that saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Exactly. Transparency is crucial for building a healthy community. It builds trust, encourages people to get involved, and makes it harder for things to go wrong.
And speaking of getting involved, I think it's time to talk about what homeowners can actually do to make a positive impact in their communities. We've covered a lot of ground here, but I think what sets this deep dive apart is that it's not just about understanding how HOAs work. It's about taking action, right?
Absolutely. Knowledge is great, but if you don't use it, it's not going to do much good.
So let's talk about some practical steps homeowners can take. What's the first thing you would recommend?
Well, first and foremost, get to know your HOA's governing documents. Really dive into them.
You mean like more than just skimming them to see if I can have a dog or what color I could paint my fence?
Yeah, those documents are like the rule book for your community. They outline everything from how the board is structured to how finances are handled. And of course, they also cover all those everyday rules and regulations.
Okay, so understanding those documents is about more than just knowing what you can and can't do on your property. It's about understanding how the whole system works.
Exactly. And that understanding can be really empowering. It allows you to hold the HOA board accountable, advocate for changes, and even participate in shaping the future of your community.
All right, so step one, get to know those governing documents. What's next?
Get involved. Go to the HOA meetings. I know they're not always the most exciting thing, but they're your chance to hear what the board is working on, ask questions, voice your concerns.
It's about showing up and making your voice heard.
Exactly. And it's also a great opportunity to meet your neighbors, build relationships, and really foster that sense of community.
Turn it from a chore into a social event almost.
Exactly. And beyond attending meetings, think about volunteering for an HOA committee. A lot of HOAs have committees that focus on specific things, like landscaping or social events.
It's about going from being just a resident to being an active participant.
That's a good one. I'm picturing a place where people know each other, look out for each other, where the HOA is responsive to people's needs, not just focused on enforcing rules.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now, take that vision and ask yourself, what's one small thing I can do today to move my community closer to that ideal?
It's about turning those big ideas into action, right? It doesn't have to be some huge, grand gesture.
Exactly. Maybe it's organizing a neighborhood cleanup, starting a community garden, or even just introducing yourself to a new neighbor.
Those little things can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to creating a more connected and thriving community.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've talked a lot about how HOAs work, all the different moving parts. But now I want to get into the part that I think is most important for our listeners, which is, what can you do to actually make a difference in your community?
Right. It's not enough to just understand how things work.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to take action. Exactly. And our research actually found some surprisingly simple but effective ways to do that.
Yeah, one of the biggest things is get to know your HOA's governing documents, like really know them.
I got to admit, I'm guilty of kind of just skimming those. I usually just look for the stuff about, can I have a fence? What color can I paint my house? That kind of thing.
Yeah, but those documents are like the foundation of your community. They lay out how everything works, from the board to the finances to all those rules and regulations.
So it's about more than just knowing what you can and can't do on your property. It's about understanding the big picture.
Exactly. And when you understand that bigger picture, you can actually hold the HOA accountable, advocate for changes, and really have a say in how things are run.
Okay, so step one, get to know those governing documents. What else can homeowners do?
Go to the HOA meetings. I know, they're not always the most exciting thing.
Yeah.
But they're your chance to actually talk to the people who are making decisions, ask questions, voice your concerns, make your voice heard.
Instead of just complaining about the HOA from the sidelines, actually show up and participate.
Exactly. And who knows, you might even meet some of your neighbors there, make some new friends.
Turn it into a social event.
Right. And if you want to get even more involved, a lot of HOAs have committees that focus on different areas like landscaping or social events. Volunteering for a committee is a great way to really make a difference.
It's about being part of the solution. So let's switch gears for a minute. I want to try something. Close your eyes and picture your ideal HOA. What does it look like? What kind of community does it create?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I'm seeing a place where everyone knows each other, helps each other out, where the HOA is focused on making life better for the residents, not just enforcing a bunch of rules.
I love that vision. Now here's the challenge. What's one small thing you can do, like today, to move your own community closer to that ideal?
It's about taking that big picture and breaking it down into actionable steps.
Yeah, right. It doesn't have to be some huge dramatic thing. Maybe it's picking up trash in the park or starting a community garden or even just introducing yourself to a new neighbor.
It's those little things that can add up to make a big difference.
Absolutely. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. There are resources out there to help you. Like we mentioned earlier, the HOA handbook from the Georgia HOA Alliance is a great place to start.
It's full of helpful info for both homeowners and board members.
Exactly.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of HOAs. We hope you've learned something new and, more importantly, that you feel inspired to take action in your own community.